The crimson smoke billowing from the laboratory vents sent the research station into an immediate lockdown. Dr. Yorick Zamora watched in bewilderment as alien scientists in environmental suits swarmed the cafeteria where he'd been enjoying his lunch, their instruments scanning the air with frantic urgency. "Human contamination detected! Deadly toxin released!" The lead alien researcher, Vexil, shouted through his translator, his 4 eyes bulging with alarm. The tall, blue-skinned scientist pointed directly at Yorick's plate. "The source is there. Nobody move." Yorick glanced down at his meal, a simple pasta dish he'd prepared using ingredients from his personal supplies. It's just spaghetti with marinara sauce and some cayenne pepper." "Capsaicin detected." Vexil's voice pitched higher, causing his translating device to crackle. "A known neurotoxin that causes intense burning sensations, respiratory distress, and potential cellular damage." Yorick blinked slowly, fork still suspended midair with twirled pasta. "You mean my hot sauce?" The incident in the cafeteria of Interstellar Research Station Epsilon 9 marked the beginning of what would become the most unusual scientific standoff in human-alien relations history. Yorick hadn't expected his lunch to cause an interstellar incident, but as the station's only human botanist assigned to the joint research mission, he suddenly found himself at the center of an unexpected crisis. "I need to confiscate this biological weapon immediately," Vexil declared, carefully approaching with a containment unit while other aliens backed away in visible terror. "It's not a weapon," Yorick protested, watching as his lunch was sealed away. "Humans have been consuming spicy foods for thousands of years. It's just seasoning." Vexil's translator struggled to convey his mixture of horror and scientific fascination. "You willingly consume a compound that causes pain? This requires immediate investigation." He turned to his team. "Full quarantine protocols. The human may be suffering neurological damage without realizing it." Before Yorick could further object, 2 security officers hulking reptilian beings called Draxians escorted him from the cafeteria toward the medical bay. "This is completely unnecessary," Yorick insisted as they walked. "I can prove capsaicin is harmless to humans." "Science Officer Vexil is our leading xenobiologist," grunted one of the Draxians. "If he says it's poison, then it's poison." The medical bay of Epsilon 9 was a marvel of interstellar cooperation, featuring technology from 17 different species. Unfortunately for Yorick, none of that technology was designed with human physiology as a priority. He sat on an examination table while Vexil and the station's chief medical officer, Dr. Xylith, debated his fate. Xylith, a willowy green-skinned being with 6 elongated fingers on each hand, adjusted her ocular enhancers to better examine Yorick. His vital signs appear stable, though slightly elevated. Perhaps the toxin's effects are gradual. "I'm fine," Yorick emphasized. "My vital signs are elevated because I'm frustrated at having my lunch confiscated and being treated like I'm dying when I'm perfectly healthy." Vexil shook his head, causing the small sensory tendrils around his face to sway. "The chemical analysis is undeniable. Capsaicin binds to pain receptors. It causes burning sensations. By definition, it is a toxin." He turned to face Yorick directly. "Yet you deliberately added this substance to your food. Why would you do this if not to test your own physiological limits?" Yorick sighed. "Because it tastes good. It adds flavor." "You enjoy pain?" Xylith asked, genuinely confused. "No, it's not exactly pain. It's more like..." Yorick struggled to find the words. "It's a sensation that adds to the eating experience. It makes food more interesting." The aliens exchanged glances that Yorick had come to recognize as their equivalent of profound confusion. "This requires further study," Vexil declared. "I am placing the human under medical observation for the next 48 hours. "You can't be serious," Yorick protested. "I have work to do. The botanical samples from Kepler 400 need processing today." "Your experiments can wait," Vexel said firmly. Understanding how a sentient species deliberately poisons itself for pleasure is now our priority research. Over the next several hours, Yorick underwent a battery of tests. Blood samples were taken, neural scans were conducted, and his digestive system was mapped through various non-invasive techniques. Throughout it all, he attempted to explain the human relationship with spicy food, but his explanations fell on skeptical ears. The scans show increased endorphin production, Xylith noted, studying a holographic display of Yorick's brain chemistry. A stress response consistent with pain. Exactly, Yorick said. That's why some humans enjoy it. The mild discomfort triggers endorphin release, which feels good. Vexel's tendrils twitched with interest. So you cause yourself controlled harm to experience pleasure? Fascinating. This could be classified as a form of ritualistic self-harm. That's not, Yorick started, then sighed. Look, can I at least contact Earth? Get someone from the Interstellar Relations Office to confirm that hot sauce isn't going to kill me? Communication with Earth takes 18 hours at present orbital alignment, Xylith reminded him, and their response would take another 18. By then, any acute effects would have manifested. As the day progressed, word spread throughout the station. Alien researchers from various departments found excuses to pass by the medical bay, eager to catch a glimpse of the human who supposedly poisoned himself for enjoyment. Yorick felt like a zoo exhibit. During a brief respite when both Vexel and Xylith were reviewing test results in another room, a small green alien with overlarge eyes slipped into the medical bay. It was Mickey, one of the junior xenobotanists who had been working with Yorick on plant classification. Dr. Zamora, Mickey whispered, approaching cautiously. Is it true? You consume pain-inducing chemicals willingly? Yorick nodded, grateful for the company even if it came with more questions. Many humans do. It's part of our culinary culture. Mickey's eyes widened further, which Yorick hadn't thought possible. But why? It's hard to explain, Yorick said. It adds dimension to food. Think about how some plants have complex defense mechanisms that make them interesting to study. Capsaicin is actually a plant defense mechanism to prevent mammals from eating the seeds, but humans found a way to appreciate it instead. Mickey considered this. So you overcame a plant's evolutionary defense through cultural adaptation? Exactly. Yorick felt a surge of hope that someone might understand. Their conversation was cut short when Vexel returned, shooing Mickey away. The human needs rest, he insisted, though Yorick felt perfectly fine. I've been thinking, Yorick said as Mickey departed. There's a simple way to resolve this. Let me demonstrate that capsaicin is safe. Vexel tilted his head. How would you propose to do that? Let me eat some, right here under observation. You'll see that nothing bad happens. The alien scientist considered this for a moment. A controlled experiment. Yes, that has merit, but we would need to start with minimal exposure and gradually increase dosage. Yorick tried not to roll his eyes. Fine. Whatever it takes to prove I'm not trying to poison myself. Within an hour, Vexel had assembled a research team and set up monitoring equipment around Yorick's bed. The confiscated hot sauce was brought in, contained within a force field bubble as if it were radioactive waste. We will begin with 1 microgram, Vexel announced to the assembled scientists. That's barely a molecule, Yorick protested. I normally use several grams on a dish. Vexel looked horrified. And you're still alive. Remarkable. Nevertheless, we must follow scientific protocols. The experiment proceeded with excruciating slowness. Yorick was given a tiny drop of diluted hot sauce, after which the aliens monitored him for 30 minutes before deciding it was safe to proceed to the next dose. By the 8th increment, Yorick could finally detect a faint hint of spice. I'm feeling it now, he reported, a mild warmth on my tongue. This caused a flurry of activity as instruments were aimed at his mouth and thermal scans were taken of his digestive tract. Internal temperature increasing in the oral cavity, one assistant reported. Fascinating, Vexel murmured, recording the data personally. And you describe this sensation as pleasant? Not exactly pleasant in itself, Yorick tried to explain. It's more about the contrast and complexity it adds to flavors. Can we please increase the dose to something meaningful? At this rate, we'll be here for days. After much debate, they agreed to accelerate the protocol. By evening, Yorick was finally allowed to taste a respectable amount of hot sauce, still less than he would normally use, but enough to demonstrate a clear reaction. "Now that's more like it," he said after swallowing. "Decent heat, good flavor profile. This is how it's supposed to taste." The aliens watched in fascination as Yorick's face flushed slightly and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Instruments recorded elevated heart rate and increased endorphin levels. "The human is exhibiting clear physiological stress responses," Xylith noted, "yet claims to be enjoying the experience." "It's called acquired taste," Yorick explained. "Many human delicacies work this way. Coffee, alcohol, certain fermented foods, they all have elements that are technically toxic, but in quantities our bodies can process without harm. The mild stress response becomes part of the experience we seek." Vexel seemed troubled by this explanation. "Your species deliberately seeks mild poisoning as a form of entertainment?" "When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is," Yorick admitted. "But essentially, yes. It's a controlled experience that adds intensity to life." As the evening progressed, more station personnel gathered to witness the experiment. Word had spread throughout Epsilon 9, and now researchers were placing bets on how much capsaicin the human could tolerate before showing signs of distress. "I want to try a full teaspoon," Yorick announced, growing tired of the incremental approach. This caused an uproar among the assembled aliens. Some feared for his safety, while others were scientifically curious to observe the results. After heated debate, Vexel reluctantly agreed, but insisted on having emergency medical equipment ready. A single teaspoon of Yorick's hot sauce was carefully measured and presented to him on a sterile plate. The room fell silent as he consumed it without hesitation. The effect was immediate. Yorick's face reddened, sweat beaded on his forehead, and he reached for the water that Xylith quickly provided. "Water actually spreads the capsaicin," he explained between gulps. "Milk would be better, but I don't think we have any." "Are you in distress?" Vexel asked, instruments trained on Yorick's vital signs. "I'm fine," Yorick assured him, though his voice was slightly strained. "This is actually moderate heat by human standards. Some people eat things far spicier." This information caused a fresh wave of astonishment among the observers. Mickey, who had returned to witness the experiment, looked particularly impressed. "The implications for understanding human evolution are significant," Vexel mused, reviewing the data. "To develop tolerance for compounds that cause distress in most species suggests either extraordinary adaptability or a history of environmental pressure we hadn't considered." As the evening wore on, Yorick found himself the center of increasingly sophisticated discussions about human physiology, evolutionary biology, and cultural development. What had begun as a misunderstanding was transforming into a genuine scientific inquiry. "I propose we expand this research," Vexel announced finally. "With the humans' consent, of course. This opens new avenues for understanding interspecies differences in perception and adaptation." Yorick, seeing an opportunity, nodded. "I'll cooperate, but on one condition. I want access to my personal food supplies again. And I want to introduce interested station members to human cuisine under controlled conditions, if you insist." Vexel considered this request. "Acceptable, provided all consumption occurs with medical supervision initially." The following day, Yorick was released from medical observation with a clean bill of health. His hot sauce was declassified from deadly toxin to xenobiological curiosity, and he was granted permission to resume his regular duties with the botanical research team. Word of the capsaicin experiment spread throughout the station, leading to unexpected interest in human dietary practices. Yorick found himself fielding questions from aliens of various species, all curious about other poisons humans willingly consumed. "Is it true you drink ethanol?" asked Graxil, a physicist from a methane-based species who communicated through a complex translation device. "Some humans do, yes," Yorick confirmed. "In moderation, it causes mild intoxication without permanent harm." "And you consume fermented dairy products?" inquired another researcher, looking both disgusted and fascinated. "Cheese is actually delicious," Yorick defended, "though I understand why lactose digestion seems strange to non-mammalian species." A week after the initial incident, Vexil approached Yorick with an unexpected proposal. "I have secured authorization for a special research initiative," he announced. "With your assistance, we wish to catalog human consumption of substances that would be toxic to other species, with the goal of understanding the evolutionary advantages this might confer." Yorick couldn't help but smile. "You want me to introduce you to human food?" "For scientific purposes," Vexil clarified, though his tendrils twitched in what Yorick had come to recognize as excitement. The cafeteria was specially reserved for what became known as the Human Toxicity Exhibition. Using his personal supplies and items specially requested from the next supply ship, Yorick prepared small samples of various human foods that contained compounds potentially harmful to other species. "This is chocolate," he explained to the gathered scientists, presenting small pieces on a tray. "It contains theobromine, which is toxic to many earth animals, but safe for humans in normal quantities." "And this?" Xylith inquired, pointing to another plate. "Cinnamon. It contains coumarin, which in large doses can cause liver damage, but in the amounts we use for flavoring, it's perfectly safe." The aliens took careful notes, scanning each item before some brave souls volunteered to try compatible substances. Most found the flavors overwhelming or unpleasant, but a few discovered unexpected appreciation for certain human foods. Mickey, the junior xenobotanist, developed a particular fondness for mild salsa. "The combination of capsaicin with the acidic tomato creates a fascinating sensory experience," she explained, her species equivalent of taste buds, apparently similar enough to human ones to appreciate the flavor. As the weeks passed, the research expanded. Yorick worked with Vexil to document how human physiology processed compounds that would be dangerous to other species. They examined the enzymes that allowed humans to detoxify certain substances, the receptors that responded to irritants like capsaicin, and the neurological responses that turned mild stress into pleasure. Your species' relationship with potentially harmful substances extends beyond food, Vexil observed one day as they reviewed their findings. Your recreation, your medicine, even your art often involves controlled exposure to stress or toxins. Yorick considered this. "I suppose that's true. Humans often seek out controlled risk or discomfort, everything from spicy food to extreme sports. There's something about pushing boundaries that we find rewarding." "A fascinating evolutionary strategy," Vexil mused. "Most species evolve to avoid harm. Yours evolved to categorize and calibrate it, turning potential threats into opportunities for pleasure or growth." The research attracted attention beyond Epsilon 9. As their findings were transmitted back to their respective homeworlds, requests for more information poured in. The Interstellar Research Council upgraded the priority of their project, allocating additional resources for what was now called the Human Adaptive Consumption Study. 3 months after the hot sauce incident, a specialized delegation arrived at the station to observe the research firsthand. Among them was Dr. Alara Quint, Earth's leading xenobiologist and a specialist in comparative physiology. "Dr. Zamora," she greeted Yorick warmly, "I've reviewed your work with Dr. Vexil. What began as a misunderstanding has evolved into one of the most comprehensive studies of human consumption patterns in an interspecies context." "It wasn't exactly planned," Yorick admitted. "I was just trying to eat lunch." Dr. Quint laughed. "Sometimes the best scientific discoveries start that way. The Council is particularly interested in the potential applications for interspecies medical treatments. Understanding how humans process certain compounds might help develop medications safe for multiple species. The arrival of the delegation coincided with a special event. Yorick had been planning a formal dinner showcasing human cuisine for those station members whose physiology could safely partake. With additional supplies from Earth, he prepared a feast that demonstrated the full spectrum of human flavors, including carefully calibrated spicy dishes for the more adventurous aliens. The dining hall was transformed for the occasion, with special atmospheric controls to accommodate various species requirements. Yorick stood at the front, explaining each dish before it was served. This is curry, a dish that combines multiple spices including turmeric, cumin, and various levels of chili peppers depending on the recipe. The version I've prepared has 3 heat levels, indicated by the colored flags. Vexil, who had gradually developed a tolerance for mild spice, selected the medium option, a choice that would have been unthinkable months earlier. As the meal progressed, conversation flowed freely. The initial fear of human consumption habits had transformed into scientific curiosity and even culinary appreciation among some species. "I must admit," Vexil said to Yorick as they enjoyed the final course, "when I first witnessed you consuming capsaicin, I was convinced you were either suicidal or suffering from neurological damage. Now I find myself voluntarily consuming diluted amounts for the sensory experience." "Cultural exchange works both ways," Yorick replied. "I've developed quite a taste for that fermented root vegetable your species enjoys." "The one that smells like Earth gym socks but tastes surprisingly good." Dr. Quint, overhearing their conversation, joined them. "That's exactly the kind of cross-species adaptation we're interested in studying. Both of you have expanded your sensory experiences through controlled exposure to substances you initially found aversive." After dinner, the delegation proposed expanding the research to include other aspects of human physiological adaptability. Dr. Quint suggested that Yorick's experience might serve as a model for improving interspecies understanding in other areas where biological differences caused misinterpretation. "Consider how many diplomatic incidents might have been avoided if we better understood each other's biological responses," she pointed out. "What appears as aggression in one species might be curiosity in another. What seems like poison to one might be seasoning to another." The following morning, Yorick found Vexil in the laboratory, reviewing data from the previous night's dinner. The alien scientist seemed troubled. "Is something wrong?" Yorick asked, joining him at the holographic display. "I have been reconsidering our initial interaction," Vexil admitted. "My immediate assumption that you were endangering yourself was based on applying my species' biological parameters to yours. It was not good science." "We all make assumptions based on our own experiences," Yorick said. "I probably would have done the same if I saw you eating something that would harm humans." "Perhaps." Vexil's tendrils moved in a pattern Yorick had come to recognize as thoughtful contemplation. "But it highlights a fundamental challenge in interspecies research. How much do we miss by filtering other species' behaviors through our own biological context?" This conversation sparked a new direction in their research. Over the next 6 months, Yorick and Vexil developed protocols for assessing potentially harmful substances across species lines, creating a framework that could be applied throughout interstellar scientific communities. Their work culminated in a comprehensive database of cross-species consumption compatibility, identifying which compounds safe for one species might be dangerous for another, and vice versa. The database became a standard reference tool for interstellar medical teams, diplomatic corps, and research stations. A year after the hot sauce incident, Yorick received notification that he and Vexil had been awarded the Interstellar Scientific Cooperation Medal for their contribution to xenobiology and cultural understanding. "I never expected my lunch to lead to a scientific breakthrough," Yorick remarked during the award ceremony. "The greatest discoveries often come from unexpected observations," replied the head of the Interstellar Research Council. "Your willingness to explain rather than take offense, and Dr. Vexil's openness to revising his initial assumptions exemplify the ideal of interspecies scientific cooperation." The ceremony concluded with a reception featuring foods from various worlds, each clearly labeled with compatibility indicators developed from Yorick and Vexil's research. Humans mingled with aliens, sampling compatible dishes and respectfully avoiding those marked as potentially harmful to their species. Yorick found Vexil by the Earth food section, carefully selecting a piece of mild jalapeno cornbread. "Expanding your capsaicin tolerance?" Yorick asked with a smile. "Gradually," Vexil confirmed. "I find the sensation interesting, though not as enjoyable as you do. But understanding the experience helps me understand your species better." "That works both ways," Yorick said, gesturing to his own plate, which contained a sample of Vexil's homeworld cuisine. "I'm developing an appreciation for flavors I once found completely alien. Literally." As they enjoyed their food, Dr. Quint joined them with exciting news. "The Council has approved funding for an expanded research initiative based on your work. We're establishing an interspecies sensory perception laboratory that will study not just taste, but all sensory experiences across species lines." "That's fantastic," Yorick said. "There's so much more to explore. Think about how differently we experience color, sound, even gravity." "Indeed," Vexil agreed, "and each difference provides an opportunity for greater understanding if we approach it with scientific curiosity rather than fear of the unknown." The three scientists continued their discussion, envisioning new avenues of research that would build on what had begun as a simple misunderstanding about hot sauce. In the years that followed, the Zamora-Vexil protocols for interspecies consumption safety became standard throughout human-alien interactions. Diplomatic functions, research missions, and interstellar gatherings all benefited from the clear compatibility guidelines that prevented dangerous misunderstandings while encouraging safe exploration of different species' consumption habits. Epsilon 9 became known as the birthplace of xenogastronomy, a new field that combined elements of biology, chemistry, and cultural studies to explore how different species experienced food. The station expanded its research facilities to include specialized laboratories dedicated to sensory perception studies across species lines. Yorick himself became a respected figure in interstellar scientific circles, frequently consulted on matters of human-alien physiological compatibility. He often reflected on how differently things might have gone had he reacted with indignation rather than patience when his lunch was confiscated. 5 years after the incident, Yorick and Vexil co-authored Poison or Pleasure: The Subjective Nature of Biological Response, a comprehensive work that became standard reading for xenobiology students throughout Earth and allied worlds. In the book's introduction, they recounted the hot sauce incident that had brought them together, using it to illustrate a larger point about interspecies understanding. What one species perceives as deadly, another may experience as merely flavorful. The chemical reality remains the same. It is our biological context that creates meaning. In this gap between objective reality and subjective experience lies the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity for interspecies scientific cooperation. By recognizing that our perceptions are shaped by our biology, we open ourselves to truly understanding the universe through eyes, senses, and biochemistry different from our own. And in doing so, we expand not only our scientific knowledge, but our conception of what it means to be alive in a diverse cosmos. The last page of their book featured a simple image: a bottle of hot sauce floating in zero gravity against the backdrop of stars, with a caption that read, "Sometimes understanding begins with a single taste.